The Duchess of Hawthorne was asked to eat with the servants at her own family dinner. And the worst part was not the insult. The worst part was that her husband heard it and said nothing for 7 years. Eleanor Hawthorne had sat at the right hand of Duke William Hawthorne at every family gathering, every winter feast, every charitable supper, and every long, polished dinner where the Hawthorne name was praised by people who had no idea how much of it survived because of her. She knew which cousin could not be seated beside which aunt, which merchant required flattery before signing a renewal, which widowed tenant needed help without being made to feel like charity, and which members of the family smiled at her in public while reminding her in private that a doctor's daughter should never have become a duchess. She had endured all of it with the same quiet grace she brought to every difficult thing. But on the night of the Dowager Duchess's 80th birthday, Eleanor entered the dining room in a dark blue silk gown, carrying a small ivory fan and the tired dignity of a woman who had spent the entire day arranging flowers, settling disputes, correcting the kitchen accounts, and ensuring the old woman who disliked her most would still receive a celebration worthy of the Hawthorne name. The table was full. That was the first thing she noticed. Not crowded, not mistaken. Chair had been placed, every name card had been written, every guest had a seat beneath a silver candelabra except one. Herzat, the head of the room, Dowager Duchess Agnes Hawthorne, smiled as if she had been waiting all evening for Eleanor to understand the arrangement. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, her voice sweet enough to poison tea. "How unfortunate we had to make room for cousin Helena. I'm sure you understand. Perhaps tonight you might take your supper below stairs with the servants." The room went silent. 32 relatives, guests, cousins, old family friends, and distant connections froze over their soup spoons. A footman near the sideboard lowered his eyes. Lady Helena, who had taken the chair beside William, looked embarrassed for exactly 1 second before deciding embarrassment did not suit her face. Eleanor did not look at Helena. She looked at William. Her husband sat with one hand around his wineglass, his expression carefully still. He had heard his mother. He had understood the insult. He knew exactly what it meant to ask a duchess, in front of the family she had served for 7 years, to leave the table and eat downstairs. Eleanor waited, not for a speech, not for a quarrel, only one sentence. "Mother, that is my wife." That would have been enough. William did not say it. The silence became the answer. Eleanor felt something inside her go very quiet, not break. Breaking would have been too loud, too dramatic, too generous to the people watching. This was smaller and colder than breaking. It was the final closing of a door she had held open far too long. The Dowager Duchess tilted her head. "Well, Eleanor folded her fan. "Of course," she said. William's eyes moved sharply to hers. Then, as if her obedience surprised him more than his mother's cruelty, Eleanor gave him a small, polite smile, the kind of smile she had used for years when creditors were rude, relatives were unkind, and guests praised William for work she had done. Then she turned and left the dining room. No tears, no protests, no protests, no scene that disappointed some of them. Society, even family society, has always preferred a woman's pain when it arrives loudly enough to become entertainment. But Eleanor had learned long ago that dignity, when carried properly, could make a room feel more ashamed than anger ever would. If you have ever watched a woman be treated as invisible by the very people she kept standing, stay with Eleanor until the end. Subscribe to Romance Stories for more emotional romance dramas, and tell me in the comments what city you are watching. From the servants' hall fell silent when Eleanor entered. It was not the silence of judgment, it was the silence of people who loved her and were horrified that she had come to them for a reason they could already guess. Cook stood up first, wiping her hands on her apron as though she might somehow repair the insult with clean palms. "Your Grace," she said, voice shaking, "is everything all right?" Eleanor looked at the long wooden table where the servants had begun their supper: stew, brown bread, boiled carrots, and a pitcher of small beer. It smelled better than the venison upstairs, warmer, certainly more honest. "I was told there was no room for me at dinner," Eleanor said. "May I sit here?" For a moment nobody moved. Then old Mr. Fletcher, the butler, pulled out the chair at the head of the servants' table with such solemn care that it might have been a throne. "There will always be room for you here, Your Grace." That was the first kindness of the evening. It nearly undid her. Eleanor sat. The servants sat after her, slowly, uncertainly, as if they were afraid the very act of sharing a table with their duchess might be punished later. She took the bowl Cook placed before her and thanked her as though it were the finest course served in London. For several minutes no one spoke. Then Molly, a young housemaid with red hands and nervous eyes, whispered, "I'm sorry, Your Grace." Eleanor looked up. "You did nothing." "That's not true," Molly said, and her eyes filled. "None of us did." The words traveled down the table. Cook looked at her plate. Mr. Fletcher folded his hands. A stable boy stared at the floor. Eleanor understood then that the entire house had known how the family treated her. They had seen more than she realized. Servants always do. They See what families hide from guests and what husbands pretend not to. Notice cook cleared her throat when my daughter had the fever last winter. Your Grace sent the doctor and told him to charge it to the school fund, Eleanor said softly. Your daughter needed a doctor. You told everyone the fund had extra money that quarter. It didn't. You sold your pearl comb at the far end of the table. One of the footmen looked up. My brother got his place at the mill because of your letter, a laundrymaid added. My mother still has the coal you sent. She said no lady ever spoke to her as if she mattered before you. Mr. Fletcher's voice was low. The tenants call you the Heart of Hawthorne. Ma'am. Eleanor's spoon stilled upstairs. The Hawthorne family was drinking wine from crystal glasses beneath portraits of men who had inherited land, titles, and opinions of themselves downstairs. The people who cleaned their boots and lit their fires were telling her she had mattered. It was a strange thing to be wounded in one room and seen in another. Eleanor finished her supper with the servants that night. When she rose, every person at the table rose with her. She did not ask them to. That made it worse. At the dining table upstairs, William noticed Eleanor's absence only after the fish course. That was not because he had forgotten her, he told himself. That later he had known she was gone. Of course he had known the room had felt different after she left, though he could not explain why. His mother seemed pleased. Helena talked too loudly. Cousin Marcus told a hunting story William had heard 3 times before. Everyone behaved as if the insult had passed because the person insulted had politely removed herself from view, but the evening never recovered. Flowers seemed over-arranged. The soup was too salty. The candles smoked. Helena tried to discuss the new schoolhouse fund and got the village name wrong twice. His mother complained about the seating of the bishop's widow, not knowing Eleanor had changed it that morning to prevent a quarrel with Lady Armitage. Without Eleanor at the table, the family's elegance became visible as performance. William drank more wine than usual. Near the end of dinner, Lady Helena leaned toward him and said, Eleanor is very accommodating, isn't she? The word struck him unpleasantly. Accommodating, it was the kind of word people used when they benefited from someone's silence. She is gracious, William said. Helena smiled. Yes, that too, for the first time that evening. William disliked her not enough to defend his wife. That was the shameful part. Yet the next morning, Eleanor was not at breakfast. William noticed immediately. Her chair remained empty beside him, and no one dared sit in it. His mother glanced at the chair, then at him, and said nothing that should have satisfied him. Proof that even Agnes Hawthorne understood she had gone too far. Instead, it unsettled him. Where is her Grace? He asked the footman in the village. Your Grace, the village. Yes, your Grace. She left before sunrise. His mother sniffed, sulking. I imagine. William looked at her. No, Eleanor does not sulk. Agnes lifted one brow. Then perhaps she has gone to be admired by the poor. They do seem devoted to her. There was contempt in the words. William heard it for once. Eleanor returned afternoon with mud on the hem of her gown and a ledger under her arm. She had spent the morning at the schoolhouse, where 2 teachers were threatening to resign because the family council had delayed their salaries again. She had paid them from her private account and written a note to the steward, instructing him to stop sending educational funds through Agnes's household purse. When she entered the library, William was waiting. We need to speak about last night, he said. Eleanor removed her gloves. Do we? His jaw tightened. My mother should not have spoken to you that way. No, he waited for her to say more. She did not. I meant to object. Eleanor looked at him, then really looked. But you did not. It happened quickly. No, William, it happened slowly over 7 years. Last night was only the first time. There was no chair. He flinched. She walked to the desk and placed the ledger down. I have work to do, Eleanor. She stopped with her hand on the leather cover. I am sorry. The words should have mattered. They did not. Not enough. I believe you, she said, crossed his face. Then she continued, but I no longer know what to do with an apology that arrives after the humiliation has already been served for 3 days. Hawthorne Hall moved as though nothing had changed. That was how old families who survived their own cruelty, they relied on habit to sweep away consequence. Breakfast was served. Letters were answered. Horses were brought around. The Dowager Duchess received callers in the green drawing room and mentioned to 3 different women that Eleanor had always been sensitive about her origins. Eleanor heard about it from Mrs. Bellamy, who heard it from Lady Armitage, who had repeated it with the particular concern of someone delighted to deliver injury in the name of friendship. Eleanor smiled. Then she began making arrangements, not dramatic ones. Eleanor had never needed drama to be effective. She wrote to the school trustees. She transferred the charity account. She instructed the steward to send all tenant petitions directly to William. She returned 3 family ledgers to the Duke's study with neat notes attached. Requires His Grace's attention. She packed 1 trunk, then another. On the 5th morning, William found the west sitting room half empty. Eleanor's writing desk was cleared. The small portrait of her parents was gone. The blue shawl from the chair was gone. The vase of dried lavender she always kept near the window was gone. It was absurd that those little absences frightened him more than any argument could have. He found her in the hall, speaking quietly to Mr. Fletcher. "Where are you going?" William asked. "Eleanor turned to my parents' house in Briar Glen." "That cottage?" "Yes." "For how long?" She looked at him with something almost like pity. "I don't know." His voice dropped. "Because of a chair?" "No." The simplicity of the answer stopped him. "Then why?" Eleanor looked past him toward the staircase, the portraits, the polished banister, the house she had kept beautiful while being treated like a temporary guest inside it. "Because last night only gave shape to what I have felt for years." William stepped closer. "Eleanor, you cannot leave Hawthorne." "I can." "What will people say?" At that, she smiled. There was no warmth in it. "They will say many things. They always have. The difference is that, for once, I will not be here to make sure their words do no damage to you." Then she left. No jewels except her wedding ring, no money except what had always been hers, no servants except her maid, Mary, who insisted on going and refused to be argued with at the door. Cook wept. Mr. Fletcher bowed over Eleanor's hand. Molly tried to speak and could not. William stood on the steps as the carriage rolled away, telling himself she would return by the weekend. She did not. The first week without Eleanor was inconvenient. The second was embarrassing. The third was disaster. Schoolhouse closed for 2 days because the trustees could not agree on funding the charity. Kitchens served half its usual number of meals because the lists were wrong. To tenant families arrived at the manor expecting relief that had not been prepared. Lady Armitage withdrew from the winter bazaar after receiving an invitation addressed to her late husband. The bishop's widow was seated beside the woman who had called her son a drunkard at a funeral. 3 servants gave notice but began to understand that Eleanor had not merely managed Hawthorne, she had interpreted it. She knew the delicate machinery of pride, need, memory, obligation, and resentment that kept a great house from becoming only a pile of stone filled with selfish people. His mother refused to admit the connection. "The servants are being dramatic," Agnes said. "The tenants are confused. The school can wait. The charity is not our responsibility every hour of every day." William listened from behind his desk while 3 unopened ledgers lay before him, each bearing Eleanor's handwriting in the margins. "At last," he said. "Did you plan to remove her from the charity board?" Agnes went still. "That was answer enough." William looked up. "Mother," the Dowager Duchess folded her hands. "It was time. Eleanor has become far too influential among people who should be grateful, not attached. Helena would have been a more suitable public face for the family. Helena does not know the name of the village school. She can learn." She called Mrs. Abbott, the old woman with the basket. Agnes's expression hardened. "At least Helena understands rank." William stared at his mother for the first time. He saw not a proud old woman protecting family tradition, but a woman who would rather let the house become cruel than admit a doctor's daughter had made it kinder. "What did you think would happen?" he asked. "I thought your wife would remember her place." William looked toward the empty chair near the fire. "Chair, no," he said quietly. "She finally did the next family dinner took place 6 weeks after Eleanor left." William had not wanted to host it. Agnes insisted. She said the family needed reassurance. She said rumors were growing. She said Eleanor's absence was becoming improperly interesting. The dining room was arranged for 28th this time. Eleanor's chair remained beside William. Empty. No name card, no replacement, just the chair. Agnes noticed immediately. "William," she said under her breath, "this is theatrical." "No, it is accurate." Helena arrived in pale rose silk and glanced toward the chair with visible discomfort. No one asked to sit there. No one dared. Every person in the room remembered the last dinner. Some remembered it with guilt, some with curiosity, a few with fear, because families built on silence are always frightened when silence begins to speak. Dinner began poorly without Eleanor. It had no grace. Conversation stumbled. The wine came late. Cousin Marcus offended Lady Armitage before the soup. Helena attempted to discuss the schoolhouse and called the teachers girls, though one was 53 and had taught half the county to read. When Agnes complained that the charity accounts had become needlessly sentimental, William sat down. His glass sound was not loud, but every person heard it. "My wife was asked to eat with the servants at the last family dinner," he said. No one moved. Agnes's face went pale with fury. "William, no. Mother, you spoke last time." "I did not. That was my failure, and I intend to correct it." The room went utterly still. William stood. He had given speeches in Parliament, toasts at weddings, condolences at funerals. None had ever felt as difficult as this. "The woman you asked to leave this table is the reason this house is still respected beyond its gates. She kept the school open. She kept the charity solvent. She kept the tenants loyal. She remembered your illnesses, your debts, your quarrels, your children, your widows, your birthdays, your pride, and your reputations." His voice tightened. "She remembered all of us while we forgot her." Helena lowered her eyes. Agnes gripped the edge of the table. "William, Dude looked directly at his mother. You believed rank gave you the right to humiliate her. I believed silence protected the peace. We were both wrong. Silence did not protect peace, it protected cowardice. A cousin coughed. Someone else whispered. Good Lord, William continued, if anyone in this family believes Eleanor Hawthorne belongs stairs, they may leave my table now. And if anyone ever again speaks of her as though she should be grateful to belong here, they will discover how quickly Hawthorne can learn to do without them. No one left. That was not courage, it was calculation, but it was a beginning. The next morning, William rode to Briar Glen. He did not bring flowers. Eleanor had never been a woman softened by things that died beautifully in vases. He did not bring jewelry. She had left Hawthorne's jewels behind. He did not bring his mother's apology, because Agnes had not offered one, and he would not insult Eleanor with a counterfeit. He brought the school accounts, the charity ledgers, and a seating card from the last dinner. The cottage was small, whitewashed, and plain, with a garden that looked as if someone had loved it rather than employed gardeners to maintain it. Eleanor was pruning roses when he arrived. She wore a simple gray gown and no gloves for a moment. William could not speak. She looked rested. That hurt him, not because he wanted her unhappy, but because he had not realized how tired she had been until she was no longer tired beside him. Your Grace, she said. The title landed like a deserved punishment. Eleanor, she looked at the papers under his arm. If this is a state business, you should speak to Mr. Alden. It is not a state business. No, it is cowardice. That made her pause. He stepped down from the horse and stood by the gate. He did not enter without invitation. Another thing he should have learned years earlier. You were right, he said. It was not about the chair. No. It was about every time I let you stand alone because confronting my family seemed difficult. Eleanor's hands stilled around the pruning shears. I thought I was keeping peace, he continued, but I was keeping my comfort. There is a difference, and I am ashamed it took your absence to teach me. She looked at him, then not softly, not yet, but she looked. Willie and held up the seating card. At the last dinner, your chair remained empty. No one sat there. I told them no one ever would unless it was you. Eleanor's expression shifted, but only slightly. That was very dramatic of you. Yes, he said. I fear I am late to usefulness, so I had to begin somewhere noticeable. Despite herself, her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but almost. He placed the ledgers on the gatepost. The school accounts are corrected. The charity board has been restored with your name as permanent chair. Whether you return or not, Mother has been removed from the fund. Helena has been encouraged to discover charitable work in a county far from ours this time. Eleanor did smile faintly, then it faded. You are trying to fix the consequences. Yes, that is not the same as understanding the wound. No, William said, but I am trying to understand that too. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the rose hedge. Then, Eleanor said, when your mother told me to eat with the servants, I could have survived it. I know. When Helena took my chair, I could have survived that too. He swallowed. I know, but when I looked at you, William, I was not asking you to rescue me from humiliation. I was asking whether I belonged to you enough to be defended. The words struck him with such force he had to look away. I failed you. Yes, no softening, no rescue. Truth. I am sorry, he said. I know, and I love you. She closed to her eyes. He had said those words before, of course, in marriage, in habit, in letters signed without thought, but never like this, never standing outside a cottage gate with mud on his boots and shame in his voice. Eleanor opened her eyes. Love without courage is very hard to live on. I know that now. Knowing is not the same as changing. No, he said, but it can be the first honest step toward it. She studied him for a long time, then she opened the gate not wide enough. Eleanor did not return to Hawthorne that day or the next. William came every week. Sometimes she let him in, sometimes she did not. Sometimes they discussed the school, sometimes the tenants, sometimes nothing at all. Agnes wrote once and received no answer. Helena married a baronet in Sussex and became someone else's problem. The family learned, slowly and with great discomfort, that Eleanor's absence had not been a tantrum, it had been a verdict. Winter came, then spring. By the following summer, Hawthorne Hall looked different, not grander, better. The school had reopened under proper funding. Servants' wages increased. The charity accounts became transparent enough to frighten 3 cousins who had used them carelessly. William began attending tenant meetings to himself and learned that listening was more exhausting than ordering, but produced fewer disasters. On the anniversary of the dinner, William invited Eleanor to Hawthorne for a small supper, not a family feast, not a performance. Only 12 people, the ones who had learned how to be grateful without making gratitude sound like soup, arrived at dusk. The dining room doors opened, and there, beside William's chair, was hers. Not a new chair, not a more beautiful chair, hers, the same chair that had been removed, repaired now, polished, waiting. William stood when she entered. Everyone else stood after him. He walked to the chair and pulled it out himself. No footman. Then he looked at the room and said, This seat belongs to the Duchess of Hawthorne. It always did. Any person who forgets that may leave before the first course. No one moved. Eleanor looked at him, then at the chair, then at the table where, for the first time in years, no one seemed to be waiting for her to prove she deserved to belong. She sat only. Then did William sit beside her. It was not a perfect ending. Perfect endings belong to fairy tales and people who have not had to repair real marriages. Eleanor did not forget the dining room. She did not forget the servants' hall. She did not forget the silence, but forgiveness, when it came, arrived like spring in an old garden. Slowly, unevenly, and then all at once in places no one expected. Years later, people still spoke of the night the Duchess was told to eat with the servants. The cruel ones remembered the insult, the foolish ones remembered the scandal, but the people who understood Hawthorne remembered something else. They remembered that the servants made room for her when her own family would not. They remembered the empty chair no one dared to take. They remembered the Duke standing before his family and naming his silence for what it was, and they remembered that Eleanor Hawthorne had not needed to shout to reclaim her place. She had only needed to leave the table where she was not valued. Let everyone discover how much of the house had been standing because she stayed. Eleanor's story moved you. Subscribe to Romance Stories for more emotional romance dramas. Hidden worth, noble regret, family betrayal, and unforgettable women who walk away with their dignity intact.